Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are starting today with a new module which focuses on the genre of science fiction. So, we have to understand what science fiction is and also look at its history, its origin. Science fiction is a type of literature that deals with inventive technologies, with futurism, space travel, and explorations, and as well as other science based components. Science fiction is a subgenre which blends authors' imaginative creations with scientific ideas, theories, predictions, and conjectures or speculations. Uh, Authors often utilize science fiction in order to explore the complexities and limitations of human nature, human society in extraordinary circumstances. So, the term science fiction was first used in 1851, but it was not until 1929 when it appeared in advertisements for an early sci-fi magazine titled Air Wonder Stories that the term entered the public lexicon. It became part of the common parlance. Uh, Radio entrepreneur and journalist Hugo Ginsback first used this term scientific fiction in 1923, and later he coined science fiction in his magazine Science Wonder Stories in 1929. So, science fiction as a genre defies adherence with prescriptive constructions and definitions to the extent that it is possible to have definitional clarity. Science fiction as a genre defies adherence with prescriptive constructions and definitions to the extent that it is impossible to have definitional clarity or even historical recovery for science fiction. When did it actually start? When did this literary trend come in? In popular understanding, it is about futuristic cities or bizarre alien landscapes. So, the term science fiction refers to an alliance between science and fiction, and yet there is a sense of hostility, a kind of face off that one generally sees by the conservative and ethical stance of the fiction towards the progressive nature of science and the index of hegemony that the scientific world assumes. So, science and fiction that combine to form the genre science fiction, sci-fi, can be looked at as an oxymoron in a way, where the two components, the two parts of this name, the generic name science fiction, do not really gel very well, traditionally speaking, with one another. Patrick Parender looks at science fiction as a desire and ideology of justifying scientific research as intrinsic to the nature and purpose of human existence. So, there is a somewhat disillusionment and distrust as well as championing of science. There are both the tendencies going on simultaneously in sci-fi or science fiction. In New Maps of Hell, Kingsley Amis defines science fiction as a kind of narrative which entails innovation in science and technology, or something, a kind of a narrative that harkens, that evokes pseudoscience or pseudo technology. So, how science and fiction intersperse can be seen, in the case of Thomas More's Utopia, which would hardly make sense unless read through the prism of a fiction. So, utopia is not scientific, it's a science fiction. As a master discourse of our technocultural experience, which centers uh, a struggle by the technological regime in order to transform the cosmos through its own logic, uh, science fictional ideas and attitude pervade science fictional toys, science fictional theater, electronic devices, socio-anthropological movements, the discourse of human animal studies, all of which make the genre less fixed and less coherent and more discursive through an ensemble of phenomena uh, that foils any ready summarization, any ready and permanent definition to what science fiction is. We cannot at once have a total picture of science fiction as such. Following its inception in the 1920s, the popular fiction magazines attempted to fix a stable term and readership for the science fiction genre. So, terms such as pseudoscientific and weird scientific were being used to define the genre. So, one sees that Hugo Gernsback first uses the term science fiction, like I already said, in his magazine Science Wonder Stories. Lisa Yasek notes that the science fiction authors extrapolate from Enlightenment ideals and industrial practices in order to imagine how educated people use knowledge of machine and technologies to change the material world. So, technoscientific speculation is at the heart of most science fictions, if not all, and how technoscientific speculation leads to the question of socio-political cultural speculations. So, science fiction as a genre is essentially two things. We have to remember these two keywords when we are talking about science fiction. One is that it is speculative, the other is that it is extrapolative. In extrapolation, there is an exploration of a trend or extending of a trend from the past to the future, whereas in speculation, what we have is what if a new factor is thrown in such that a past trend becomes unrecognizable in the future. So, in the words of Isaac Asimov, I quote Asimov, from taking liberty with the unlikely to taking liberty with the impossible, unquote. So, extrapolation verges into or extrapolation is more on the side of unlikely. Speculation verges into the domain of the impossible. So, it is understood that the science fiction reader is familiar with the larger science fiction megatext so as to grasp the plausible explanation for implausible phenomena. So, when looking at the genre's emphasis on exotic difference, one could trace the roots of science fiction to travel narratives that aspire to discover phantasmatic elements on the pathways of uh, global trade routes. One could think of Marco Polo or Sir John Mandeville's descriptions of a fabulated China in the 14th century. So, with respect to the genre's concern with alterity, its roots can also be traced to utopian writing. One thinks of Thomas More's Utopia here, written in 1516, and definitely Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, written in 1726, with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which comes much later in 1818. There is an investigation of the human implications of scientific experiment, scientific conquest, what are the human consequences of these conquests? The strategy of an idealized no place or utopos, the etymological root of utopia, is a way of critiquing an existent political situation through its comparison to an imagined good place. So, similar to Plato's Republic that understands poetry as a disruptive force to any kind of order, any kind of institution or establishment, science fiction imagines the ideal polity on rational grounds. Its emergence could be connected to the scientific revolution that happened in the 17th century. So, Gulliver's Travels is based on a satirical reinvention of the allegedly wise men of the Royal Society, and in that sense, it engages with the new Enlightenment. So, critics also read this overt emphasis on science, technology, and history as resulting in a counter move that is initiated by romantic poets such as Shelley, who have a tendency to fall back on biblical and classical mythologies. So, moving away from the scientific and the technological. While Jonathan Swift trivializes science, Goethe in fact considers science as dangerous. So, cosmic voyages to the other world have often been a mainstay interest for many science fiction readers. We have here examples such as Bishop Godwin's The Man in the Moon, written in 1638, Cyrano de Bergerac's Voyages to the Moon and Sun, written in 1656, Marjorie Nicholson's Voyages to the Moon, written in as late as 1948. So, while referring to some science, in many cases the Copernican theory, speculation about plurality of the world or the universe, Johannes Kepler, and reference to Galileo Galilei, early voyage stories, apart from referring to these common scientific postulations or first pioneer figures of science and scientific discoveries, inventions, apart from referring to them, early voyage stories are closer to satiric fantasies. So, satiric fantasies like one sees in Gulliver's Travels, which is also a satiric extension of travel literature. Now, one sees, for example, that influenced by Gulliver's Travels, Voltaire writes his work Micromegas in 1752. So, Voyage to the Underground World has also interested science fiction authors. Many of them have written, journeys to the underworld. One has in mind a writer like Baron Hallberg, who writes Journey of Niels Klim to the World Underground in 1741. We have Robert Patlock's Peter Wilkins in 1750, Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, and so on. So, while science fiction and fantasy are not pure forms and can have certain interchangeable elements between themselves, so science fiction and fantasy come quite close as two different genres. They have certain overlaps. One cannot deny that. On the other hand, contrary to science fiction, fantasy does not pay any lip service to facts, to factual elements. It rather emphasizes the supernatural and the obviously impossible. So, it's not dealing with extrapolation or speculation. It is rather dealing with confabulation, with a complete move away from the uh, from anything that is immediately identifiable. Science fiction is not possible without a shift in the worldview from supernatural explanation of phenomena to rational and scientific explanation, which could fit into known or hypothesized laws of the universe. So, science fiction is playing with the implausible, but its reference point is still the relatable laws of the universe, and not a complete departure from them. The sociocultural matrix that makes science fiction possible includes extension of literacy among the lower echelons, both in England and in America, which include the working classes, the lower middle class, who are appointed widely as scientific officers, engineers, and teachers. And this leads to a general increase in scientific awareness. Mass literature referring to detective or spy fiction and science fiction tend to replace the market for dime novels. Dime novels which would deal with melodramas or melodramas of popular adventures. So dime novels are being replaced from the market by these fresh genres, science fiction and detective or spy fiction. There is a huge readership for, a huge audience or reader formed for these new genres. So, consequently, through these social phenomena, one notices that with techno scientific innovations, the context of culture in a given Euro American society is visibly transformed. What it means to what culture means to a given society, the entire meaning of culture changes, right? With awareness, with knowledge, with access to scientific understandings, through engagement with jobs that entail certain expertise, certain scientific training, the meaning of culture changes both in Europe and in America. So, Darko Suvin in Metamorphosis of Science Fiction, written in 1979, defines science fiction as, I quote Suvin, a literary genre whose necessary and sufficient conditions are the presence and interaction of estrangement and cognition. Unquote. Science fiction is characterized by a dominance of fictional novelty or innovation that is validated by cognitive logic. So, it is a literary form that is meant to critique, defamiliarize the present day reality, even satirize such a reality through the projection of alternative worlds, and this effect is achieved through applying techno-scientific methods that one can identify with. So, it is only in the late 19th century that the conditions converge for accommodating science fiction. Some of the landmark works, like we know, are by H. G. Wells. One thinks of The Time Machine, written in 1888, and The Wonderful Visit, written in 1895, The Island of Dr. Moreau, written in 1896. There are a number of ancient or early modern texts, including a great many epics and poems which contain fantastical or science fictional elements, and yet they were written before, even before the emergence of science fiction as a distinct genre. These texts often include elements such as a fantastical voyage to far off lands, or the use of imagined advanced technology such as the time machine. Epic of Gilgamesh could be regarded as one of the earliest precursors of science fiction. It is an ancient Mesopotamian epic with the earliest text versions identified as available from around 2000 BCE. So, American science fiction author Lister Del Rey argued that Gilgamesh is the earliest example of science fiction. Science fiction is precisely as old as the first recorded fiction. French science fiction writer Pierre Versins also argued that Gilgamesh was the first science fiction work due to its treatment of human reason and the quest for immortality that it persuades. Gilgamesh also features a flood scene which resembles a scene from dystopian science fiction narrative. However, the lack of explicit science or technology in the work also makes it an example of fantastic literature. Now, ancient Indian epics like Ramayana, which was, one could trace it to 5th or 4th century BC, includes instances or descriptions of vimana or flying machines which are able to travel into space or even underwater and destroy entire cities using advanced weapons. Similarly, the Mahabharata, written in 8th and 9th centuries BC, includes the story of King Kakudmi, who travels to heaven to meet Brahma and is shocked to learn that many ages have passed when he returns to earth, anticipating the concept of time travel. Another frequently cited text is the Syrian Greek writer Lucian of Samosata's 2nd century satire True History, which uses a voyage to outer space and conversations with alien life forms in order to comment on the use of exaggeration within travel literature. So, the early Japanese tale of Urashima Taro involves traveling forward in time to a distant future. It was first described in the Nihongi, which is considered as one of the oldest official histories of Japan. And Urashima Taro is about a young fisherman named Urashima Taro who visits an undersea palace and stays there for 3 days. Upon returning home to his village, he finds himself 300 years old in the future. He finds himself, 300 years into the future, where he is long forgotten. His house is in ruins and his family is long dead. Now, the 10th century Japanese narrative, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, may also be considered as proto science fiction. The protagonist of the story, Kaguya Haime, is a princess from the moon who is sent to earth for safety during a celestial war and is found and raised by a bamboo cutter in Japan. She is later taken back to the moon by her real extraterrestrial family. The manuscript illustration depicts a round flying machine that is very similar to a flying saucer. During the European Middle Ages, science fictional themes appeared within many chivalric romance and legends. Robots and automata featured in romances that started, robots and automata featured in romances starting in the 12th century. Some of the first works are Le Pèlerinage de Charlemagne and Aeneas. So, some of the first works are Le Pèlerinage de Charlemagne and Aeneas. Another 12th century work, the Roman de Troyes, features the famous Chambre de Beauté, which contain 4 automata, one holding a magic mirror, another performing somersaults, and yet others playing, musical instruments and showing people what they most needed. So, automata in these works were often ambivalently associated with necromancy and frequently guarded entrances or provided warnings provided warning of intruders. Automata in these works often ambivalently associated. Automata in these works were often ambivalently associated with necromancy and frequently guarded entrance or provided uh, warning of intruders. Such association with necromancy often leads to the appearance of automata guarding tombs, as they do in Aeneas, Floris, and Blanchefleur, and Le Roman d'Alexandre. While in Lancelot, they appear in an underground palace. So, automata did not always have to be human. A brass horse is among the marvelous gifts that are given to the Cambiascan in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Squire's Tale. In Chaucer's The Squire's Tale, the metal horse is reminiscent of similar metal horses, appearing in Middle Eastern literature, and this horse could take its rider anywhere in the world at extraordinary speed by turning a peg in its ear and whispering certain words in its ear. The brass horse is only one of the technological marvels that appears in the Squire's Tale. There are others too. In other instance, the brass horse is only one of the technological marvels that appears in the Squire's Tale. In other instances, one sees, a mirror, for example, that reveals distant places, and the witnessing crowd explains it as operating by the manipulation of angles and optics. So, this mirror that is revealing distant places through operating by manipulation of angles and optics. And there is also mention of a sword which deals and heals deadly wounds. The crowd explains it as using advanced smithing techniques. In John Rawls' Confessio Amantis, Alexander the Great constructs a flying machine through tying two griffins to a platform and dangling meat above them on a pole. This adventure is ended only by the direct intervention of God, who destroys the device and throws Alexander back to the ground. However, this does not stop the legendary Alexander, because he then proceeds to construct a gigantic orb of glass which he then uses for traveling beneath the water. So, suspended animation also appears in medieval romances such as the Historia Destructionis Troy and the Roman Tennis. In the former, in Historia Destructionis, King Priam has the body of the hero Hector entombed in a network of golden tubes that run through his body. Through these tubes ran the semi-legendary fluid called balsam. It was then believed to have the power to preserve life. This fluid kept the corpse of Hector preserved as though he were still alive, maintaining him in a persistent vegetative state during which autonomic processes such as the growth of facial hair would continue. So, the boundaries between medieval fiction with scientific elements and medieval science can be very thin and almost fuzzy at the best. So, in works such as Chaucer's The House of Fame, it is proposed that the titular House of Fame is the natural home of sound, described as ripping in the air, sound that is ripping in the air, towards which all sounds are eventually attracted. We would like to continue with this topic in our next lecture. Uh, I would stop right here at this point today. Let's meet for another round of discussions again. Thank you.